All rise. Oh yay, oh yay, oh yay. The Court of Appeals for the 4th Judicial Appellate District is now open pursuant to call.
Good afternoon, please be seated. Thank you, everyone, for coming. I'd like to take the court would like to take a point of personal privilege to acknowledge the passing of one of our colleagues just yesterday, Judge Saul Kasib. He was a formidable man, a respected jurist, and a good friend of the judiciary. And I'd like to take just a quick moment of silence to honor his service to the judiciary. Thank you. The court welcomes everyone in the courtroom, as well as those who are joining us by live stream today, this afternoon. The Court of Appeals has enjoyed this tradition. For me, one of the most honorable privilege that we have here as a judge on the 4th Court to be able to celebrate the lives and contributions of members of the bench and bar who have contributed to the jurisprudence of the state and in service of the court. We host these memorials in partnership with the San Antonio Bar Association. The purpose of these memorials is twofold. First, it is intended to honor, again, the memory of judges and attorneys whose lives serve as an example to other members of the profession. In so doing, we inspire ourselves and promote professionalism and an appreciation for how our skills and talents serve to help others. A second purpose of these services is to promote our legal fraternity, as honoring the lives of our esteemed colleagues gives us all deeper roots within our legal community. Today, we celebrate the life of Mr. Ben Alton Wallis Jr. Before we begin, I'd like to acknowledge members of our court. First, our clerk of court, Mr. Michael Cruz. To my far right is Justice Lisa Rodriguez. To my immediate right, Justice Irene Rios. To my far left, Justice Lori Valenzuela, forgive me. And to my immediate left, Justice Beth Watkins. I'd also like to acknowledge the family members who are attending here from the Wallis family. Son Ben Alton Wallis III, daughter Jessica Wallis de la Torre, and grandson Samuel Lennington. At this time, I'd like to invite our first speaker, Mr. James E. Monig, to offer remarks on behalf of the family. Thank you. Please do so. Please do approach the microphone in front of the podium, and your back is excused for the rest of our ceremony.
I'm a little unaccustomed to turn the back. Well, I can judge, so I made it to stand over here. I think I can yell loud enough.
Well, please do for purposes of audio.
Oh, I'm sorry.
I invite you to the mic.
Please excuse. Here we go.
Thank you.
Thank you all so much for having me here today. I'm just more than a little honored to come here and speak just a few words about my old friend, Ben Wallis. Let us all bow now and acknowledge Judge Mary, who has now entered the courtroom, and proud to have him here. Ben and I first met in 1968. And if my math is correct, that's about 54 years ago. I'm not sure anyone here was born at the time Ben and I knew each other. There may be a few people out in the audience, possibly just Judge Mary, but not very many. Now, Ben and I worked at the State Securities Board, which is a state agency in Austin. And the State Securities Board job is to, license people to sell stocks and bonds in Texas. But also there's an investigative branch where they investigate securities frauds and people who are not cooperating, not following the law on securities. And Ben was at that time an investigator, and I worked in the other division. Now, Ben had been there, I think, ever since about 1966. A curious thing about Ben that most people don't know other than his family is that he was actually licensed to practice law in 1966. He graduated from University of Texas School of Law in 1971. And I think I have my dates right, and I've never quite figured out how that happened. I understand it was done honestly and not any pulling the wool behind anybody's eyes or over their eyes, you might say, but somehow or other he managed to do that, and that's apparently what you could do back in those days. After all that, Ben was active in a lot of interesting things. As an example, when we had the Watergate crisis, Ben was a special counsel for the House Judiciary Impeachment Task Force. And he served on that and did that kind of work. Some of y'all may recall that back in those days, we had there was a great scandal in Houston called the Sharpstown scandal. Doesn't mean a lot to some people, but it was a big scandal. And Ben was active in that in connection with his work with the Securities Board. Now, he grew up in Llano and graduated from high school there and was a sports star, football and track. I've seen some pictures of him those days, and he was a very extraordinarily handsome young man. His son Ben has, well, perhaps followed in his path, but and perhaps not, but that's neither here nor there. He was an extraordinarily handsome man, and this is his family here sitting in the front row, and that's Ben the third, his sister, and Sam, who was Ben's grandson. Now, after these things happened, Ben opened an office in the Tower Life building, which is still there and where I still practice at this point. And he was on the 24th floor, and he did different things and did a variety of things and had a very, 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 very varied practice of law. Now, I've said this before, I don't want to mention it again. They're lawyers. I mean, we all have our motivations. And I feel that we all have to not only try to serve our clients and serve them as best we can with our abilities, but also we sort of have to make a living out of this business. Now, sometimes I have observed, and I'm sure many of us have observed, that sometimes it gets a little out of balance. And maybe that need to make some money sometimes kind of outweighs a little bit the need to serve clients. Now, I don't say that happens all the time, but occasionally it does. Ben, unfortunately, I guess, or maybe fortunately, his balance was different. His balance to serve his clients way outweighed his desire to make money. I used to laugh at him and I'd say, I said, if you read up on Don Quixote, you're going to find out he didn't do all so good. And you got to quit trying to be him. And Ben would say, oh, yeah, I know you're right. But then he'd go right on back trying to be Don Quixote. And he'd find himself a cause, maybe a windmill, some other injustice as he saw it, and he would tilt at it and he would pursue it, and he would grab his teeth onto it, and he'd shake it around like an old dog at an old bone. And you just was the darndest thing you ever saw, because one of his good qualities, and you might say many of our good qualities are also our bad qualities. One of his very good qualities is he was hard-headed and tenacious. He was loyal. He was loyal to his friends. He was loyal to his clients. And Ben really, really, really was the kind of guy who just put it all out for those clients. And I always admired that about him greatly. Now, I brought along a little exhibit that I'd like to kind of pass around to somebody. And then I'd like to explain about it. I have 5 of these, one for each of you.
Thank you. Thank you. We can also share.
We can, so you can share some with the
I
family.
brought enough, I hope for everyone.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you very much.
You're very welcome. I'm gonna pass these around to some of the other folks.
Mhm.
I was there.
Please continue, Mr. Marley.
Thank you, ma'am.
Please.
Judge Mary, thank you very much for your help. Ben was, as I said, grew up in Llano. And he died on January the 14th of 2021. And we're a little bit delayed getting here because of COVID, but he died at the age of 84 years. And his funeral was held at this place on this picture. It's beautiful. It's up in the country. And it's just as beautiful place you can imagine. But what meant so much to me about this picture is you'll see that there's a little boy standing there by the casket. That's Sam, this gentleman who's sitting here in the front row. And Sam has both hands on the casket. And I visualized him saying goodbye to his grandfather. And he stood there for a while and just stood there and had his hands there, had his head bowed. And I thought to myself, you have to be a little special to have someone love you that much. And I thought that was one of the most important things I ever even knew about Ben. Never knew it till he was dead and gone and at his funeral. But I love that picture. I want to thank you all for the opportunity to be here and say a few words. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Mr. Marley. Thank you, Mr. Monty. I will formally recognize Judge Michael Mary, who is present here in the courtroom. I also regrettably failed to acknowledge there are two members of the court that are not present today. On their behalf, I send their deepest regrets and condolences to the family. That is Justice Patricia Alvarez and Justice Lucina Chapa. At this time, I'll recognize Donna McElroy, who is the San Antonio Bar Association president. Welcome.
Good afternoon. May it
Thanks.
please the court.
It does.
Memorial resolution on the death of Ben Alton Wallis Jr. on behalf of the San Antonio Bar Association. Whereas Ben Alton Wallis Jr., born April 27, 1936 in Llano, Texas, passed away on January 14th, 2021. And whereas Mr. Wallis graduated from Llano High School and received his BBA and JD from the University of Texas at Austin. And whereas Mr. Wallis worked as an attorney for over 50 years, one of his proudest accomplishments was having his son practice law with him in the firm of Wallis Law PC. He proudly served as an associate counsel on the impeachment task force for the United States House of Representatives Committee on the Judiciary in 1974. He held admissions in many federal court jurisdictions, including the United States Supreme Court and the United States Court of Military Appeals. And whereas Mr. Wallis was a member of the State Bar of Texas, the San Antonio Bar Association, and the District of Columbia Bar Association. He served on the San Antonio Bar Association Federal Courts Committee, the State Bar of Texas Agricultural Committee, and was selected as chairman of the Agricultural Tax Committee. And whereas Mr. Wallis shared his love of hunting, ranching, and the Texas Hill Country through his life memberships in the National Rifle Association, the North American Hunting Association, and is a founding member of the South Texas Farm and Ranch Club. And whereas Mr. Wallis is survived by his two children, Ben A. Wallis III and Jessica Wallis de la Torre, and her husband, Raphael. One brother, Olney Gray Wallis, one sister, Helen Holmes, and one grandson, Samuel Gray Lennington, along with numerous nieces and nephews. Be it resolved that the San Antonio Bar Association and the Fourth Court Appeals of Texas express their genuine regret on the death of Ben Alton Wallis Jr. and express their sincerest sympathy to his family and friends. Be it further resolved that this resolution be appended to the minutes of the San Antonio Bar Association and copies sent to his family. Be it further resolved that this resolution be placed in the permanent records and minutes of the Fourth Court of Appeals of Texas, dated this 8th day of December, 2022.
Thank you, Madam President, and be it so entered that the resolution be placed in the permanent records and minutes of the Fourth Court of Appeals. Each memorial service is recorded by a court reporter and later transcribed, a copy of which is presented to the surviving members of the family and is entered in the formal minutes of the Fourth Court of Appeals. Hoffman Reporting and Video has donated their services for this purpose and have done so for several decades now. They volunteer their time and donate their services for all of these memorial services. So please join me in applause to express our gratitude to Kathy Hoffman, our court reporter, as well as Mr. Terry Lindman, our videographer. That concludes our services for this afternoon. But be you informed that the Fourth Court of Appeals will stand in recess, and the courtroom is available for your camaraderie and collegiality in celebrating the life of Mr. Ben Wallis for the rest of the afternoon. Thank you, and our court is adjourned.